evening, and welcome again to Public Perspective. I'm your host, Kevin McDermott. And yes, election season is upon us again. And one of the down ballot items that you'll see on your ballot every election is the judges. And I know many people don't pay attention to them, but they're very important because judges determine how the law is interpreted in our great state of Illinois. So tonight we are interviewing a candidate for Circuit Court in Cook County, Ms. Kristal Rivers. Kristal, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
And was that fair to say that judges are a very important position and people need to pay attention?
They're extremely important. You'll meet a judge before you meet the president. So we rule on the laws that presidents make. People don't think of it like that, but judges are very, very important, from traffic to something far more serious.
In fact, I was just going to think about a traffic judge. Like everyone thinks, oh, well, judges, I don't break the law. You speed, you get a ticket,
Most people have had one ticket in their life.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not just breaking the law, so I don't have to have an event where they get a divorce. And there may be a divorce settlement. There may be children involved. And when there are children involved, you're dealing with who gets custody of the child, how much child support is paid, how often you see your child, who makes the decisions about what school your child goes to. Those are everyday issues that people have.
And they come in front of a judge as often as not, right?
Exactly.
Even, in fact, small business owners can get sued.
Right.
And
someone can trip and fall in the middle of the workday. They're in a store, maybe they trip and fall. Or for a lawyer, they practice for at least 10 years, they're going to be found not qualified automatically. But
you, on the other hand, have been practicing for
17 years, so I'm well above that. I've had 200 trials. I've done transactional work. I've done criminal prosecution. I've been the attorney for defendants. I've been the attorney for people who are suing their tenants. I've protected tenants who are being sued by landlords. So I've done a wide range of things.
So, as a prosecutor, was that your first job out of law school?
My very first job, yes.
What made you decide to go do that? As I think I'd mentioned earlier, it seems like it's a tough job. You see the people at their worst. So, what made you decide that was something you wanted to pursue?
Being in the courtroom. And most attorneys don't have 200 trials. They don't get that in their entire career. One of the best ways to do that is to either become a prosecutor or become a public defender or work in a military court. Those are basically the options to have lots of trials, and I thought that would be exciting. I thought that I would get the opportunity to protect people. I put an application out throughout several different states, and I was hired on with the district attorney's office down in Dallas, Texas. So I'm born and raised in Chicago, but I did live down there for a few years, and that's where I began my career.
Does it help your perspective to know the laws of different states? Does that give you some sort of insight?
I absolutely think it does. It also gives you perspective of what's serious in some states and what laws aren't considered serious in other states. It also puts you around people who think differently than people in Illinois think. And not that I necessarily agree with it, but having both sides and knowing exactly the way someone who you disagree with, exactly what they think, you're in a better position to understand it, to maybe even have respect for it, and still be able to disagree with it.
So you're saying that you and the people of Texas weren't always on the same page, is it?
No. I'm a slated Democratic candidate, and the great state of Texas is full of Republicans.
Yes, it's pretty heavily on the red side of the scale.
Yes.
So how would you see that playing out if you were a judge? And one of the things that it makes me think of is having seen what you said, that the laws, really some laws are very important to people in Texas that might not be important to people in Illinois and vice versa. Does that give you a particular perspective on the law, that in some sense laws are, I won't say arbitrary, but they're interpretations of what's right based on a certain view of the world? And so does that contribute to your understanding of how laws get enforced or should be enforced, having been in the courtroom for 200 plus trials?
Well, it definitely does. One thing that's different in the state of Texas, the juries, for the most part, will decide a sentence in a criminal trial. Here, it's a judge. That gave me the opportunity to see the average citizen and what type of sentence they thought crimes were worth. Here in Illinois, it's a judge who always is making the decision. So practicing in Illinois, I've seen what judges think it's worth, or think a particular case is worth as far as sentencing with someone.
That's interesting. Did you find that juries tended to be harsher or more lenient than judges?
It really depended. If there were instances where there were complicated issues, a lot of times the juries did not get them the same as easily as the judges understood the concepts. So in instances where there was something extremely complicated, more likely than not the judge would have given a harsher sentence than the jury would have given. But if there were non-complicated issues, if it was basically cut and dry, the jury would come back with a sentence that was typically, I thought, fair.
Comparable to something you would see a judge
Right,
give.
right.
So, having seen both as a judge, how would you approach cases that that are great or that are very, very complicated? And I think now, as a, what would they call them, freshman judge? Your first year, would you be called a freshman judge?
You're definitely a new judge.
But a new judge.
A new judge.
So from what I know about the judiciary system here, you start in traffic court and you move your way up over time.
Right.
So you're not going to see terribly complex cases initially. But when I think about are cases that involve very difficult facts. I have a lot of background in the technology industry, and so in civil cases where there's a technology issue at heart, well, understanding that technology can be very difficult. So as a judge, what would you do to try to understand a case and understand what's really important, given that both sides are trying to skew your view of it based on how they want you to interpret the facts?
What's helpful now is that in Illinois, judges can actually query the witnesses. So if there is an issue that they don't understand or a witness that has not been clear, the judge can ask questions.
Is that not true in Texas, for example?
It doesn't happen. I don't know, honestly, I don't know what the law is there. I never saw a judge ask a witness a question, unless it was a bench trial where the judge was the only arbiter of the facts. Otherwise, the questions came exclusively from the attorneys, and if the attorneys intended to confuse the jury and the jury was confused, then that was what happened. Right. So here I appreciate the fact that you really can hammer down on issues and learn. And when you have technical issues, as a judge, when you're going into a case that's technical, for example, medical malpractice or something that is very technical dealing with something in the tech industry, most attorneys don't have any background in that. Even though there are a few attorneys who are also doctors who practice medical malpractice and they understand lots more than most judges. It's important to be able to get as much information out as possible. And that also cues the attorneys into knowing that the judge may not understand what's going on and need additional information, and then they can provide that.
So it's of course the attorney's job to try to present the case in the most favorable light for their client. But in Illinois, given that the judge can ask the witness questions, is it also the judge's role if you were sitting there and you felt that an attorney was skewing the case in some way that you as the judge thought didn't really represent the facts accurately, How would that work? I mean, does the judge intervene, or do you allow the other side to try to make the case? What happens there?
Well, it would seem I have a theory of what judges do. Judges are referees. However, a judge's job is not to prove the case, but it is to make sure that the evidence that's coming in is coming in according to the rules of evidence. So if there is some clear intent to confuse someone, it really depends on if it's a bench trial or a jury trial. Certainly if it's a bench trial where there is no jury who's making the decision and the evidence were to be presented to me, I could absolutely stop that.
Right.
But the plaintiff and the defendant have hired attorneys who they are trusting to give them the trial that they need and want. The attorneys may be allowing the defense counsel or the plaintiff's counsel to go down a rabbit trail because at the end, they're planning on pulling out something that wins their case. So you can't just supersede because it appears that the questions may be confusing. It's up to the other attorney to object that the question needs to be posed in a different manner, or that it's repetitive, or that it's irrelevant.
Or misleading.
Or misleading. It's up to the other attorney to do it.
Okay, so the judge really, as you say, is just the referee to say, okay, this objection it's sustained or it's overruled. It's legitimate or it's not.
Right, it's granted or it isn't.
Right. So what in your background then, having spent 17 years as an attorney, what do you think is particularly valuable of your background that brings special insight to these kinds of cases where you have to make these kinds of difficult rulings?
Well, the wonderful part is I believe that I've just got a wide breadth of background. As I said in the beginning, I have both litigation experience and I have transactional experience. I currently work for Lisa Madigan's office, and what I do is civil commitment of sexually violent predators.
Commitment to a mental institution, right?
Commitment to a mental institution that is specifically for sexually violent predators.
It's the equivalent of prison, right? They can't release themselves.
No, they absolutely can't release themselves. They're being committed. And what happens, there's an act within Illinois that says that prior to someone being released when they've been committed or convicted of a sexually violent crime, if they have a mental illness that causes them to act out in a sexually violent way, we can then commit them. So that's what I do now. And that's done in the civil arena. We have jury trials on it, and we can also do it in front of judges. But before that, I owned my own business for 10 years. And the business that I owned was my law practice. There I did what I like to think of as every man's law. It's the law that maybe you hired an attorney for before. I did real estate transactions, so lots of closings. I also did lots of landlord-tenant building code violations. I wrote wills, I wrote trusts. What that gave me was a very good insight to how someone feels when they're going through a case. So as a client, I have an idea, or as a litigant, I have an idea of their fears. When they approach the bench, I know that they're nervous. I've talked to them. I've calmed them down. I've said, it's okay, that person on the bench is not there to
throw you in jail.
To throw you in jail or to be mean to you, or they really want to hear the facts and we've got to get them out. And I understand the importance that being in court is to everyone, even on the smallest issue. If they've taken it far enough to go to court, then that's incredibly important to them. And I believe it's the judge's job to listen and hear all that. I also employed, I had employees. In addition to having employees, we did over 6,000 closings in the 10 years that I was open. So we did quite a bit. And then again, I was a prosecutor. I dealt with some tough cases as a prosecutor. I was assigned to the Child Abuse Division, which was a felony division. I was in charge of all of my own cases, from indictment to conviction. Most of the cases dealt with child abuse. Typically it was sexual abuse, but it went all the way to child murder. And then again, working on the same type of issues now. So I've dealt with heart-wrenching issues where I've had to put aside emotion and look and say, what really is the best sentence? What should I ask for? A lot of times people think of prosecutors as people who just want justice. But
Well,
justice means putting them in jail.
Right.
Well, and it's a mean, but I didn't think of it that way. I felt like my job was to make sure justice was done, which was different than just making sure something happened. And what I mean by that was my goal wasn't just to put someone away. It was to find out if it was a real case, to make sure the person was guilty before I went forward with a case.
Or that you believed there was guilt,
Right, that I believe they were guilty. I felt like I needed to believe that they really were guilty. Otherwise, I didn't want to try the case. I didn't want to try an innocent person. And I believe all of that experience would go into me sitting on the bench. All of that judgment that I used then, also the practical pressures that attorneys face, the practical pressures that business owners face, small business owners, because I was a small business owner. Right.
So you know.
Right.
Well, come back for a minute to the concept of justice, because I think that's very interesting. And when you mentioned justice as being kind of a vengeful, put them in jail, and that's justice. But that's really not a philosophical definition of justice. Justice is achieving a just result. Exactly. Which is equitable.
I agree. I agree 100%, but I don't think everyone thinks of that when they think of a prosecutor. I agree that it's not just, right, it's equity, it's fairness, it is sometimes mercy, and sometimes there's no mercy to be given. But everything needs to be looked at, not just one little area. Everything needs to be looked at.
So do you think, and I've asked this of other judicial candidates and sitting judges, how much value do you place on your own humanity in looking at these cases? You know, there's always gray areas, and life is built around the gray areas, really. And so, how much humanity can a judge bring in, and what do you think is the appropriate amount? And you mentioned justice can sometimes be mercy, which is it's a manifestation of what I think I'm getting at here. So, how do you think that balance is struck?
It takes temperance. It takes the ability to, again, temperance, the ability to not act quickly, to really want the outcome to not be, I've got somewhere to be, not have the outcome be, I need to move my court case along, my court call along. There are 20 calls or 20 more cases up, and I need to be somewhere at noon. It takes consideration of, and of course it also depends on what the case is. Sure. I do believe there are certain issues that, again, you may not be able to use justice, but then there are issues where you may not be able to use mercy, but you certainly still have to consider the facts of everything. There are issues where, for example, you said that judges start off in traffic court, right? So you have the ability to put people in jail in traffic court.
If it's heinous enough, right? Or egregious enough?
No, it's not like you murder someone, you go to traffic court. You have too many fines. You go to traffic court, and all of a sudden you find out, see, you didn't know.
I didn't realize
Most people don't know that. They figure you have to kill someone. No, you have too many fines and too many speeding tickets. Since most people don't know that, when they come to court, they're coming unaware that they may not go home that night. They may not have child care that night. They may not have anyone to pick up their kid from school. They may not have anyone to give their mother the medicine that's needed that day. All of that needs to be taken into consideration. If there's a law out there that says the judge doesn't have any wiggle room, that says they have to go to jail for X amount of days for certain violations, do they have to go that day? They don't. The judge can say, well, report next Tuesday when you've found a way for your children to be picked up from school, and when you've made arrangements for your mother and so she can get her medicine, and you've told your job. So then that person doesn't lose their job, their child doesn't stand outside waiting for mom to come get them, and their mother who's ill can be taken care of. I think that is the type of judge I would like to be.
I think I'm glad to hear that. I mean, I think that is an excellent way to sum up the fact that, and I, unfortunately, my only experience with judges is here on the show and occasionally a traffic ticket,
good.
right? Right. But I would like to think that judges, because they have so much power, really do think about the actual people that they're dealing with, because everyone who comes before a judge is a human being with a life story and a life future, or whatever that future might be. And so I know, just from my perspective, I would like to think that judges bring that kind of ability to see that these are not just cases, they're people in front of them. Something I feel needs to be done more with doctors as well, but that's another story altogether.
But they certainly aren't just cases. Every single solitary person who goes to court, that's why I said no matter how small it is, it's important to them. It's not just a case. People wouldn't miss work when it's just a case.
Right.
And they miss work for traffic. They may not be able to afford the fine. They miss work because they sue someone. It may seem minor, but to them it's serious. And I think they deserve the respect of any litigant where they get to state their case, explain why it's important to them, and then receive a fair ruling. And they may not agree with the ruling.
They may not be happy with
However,
it.
they should not feel like they were rushed through, they were pushed aside,
They were robbed.
they
or
were robbed, the
railroaded.
system's not for them.
Right.
That should never happen.
So let's switch gears a little bit and talk, instead of talking about the what happens on the bench, as a candidate.
Yes.
Since you are in fact running for judge, which I think to many people, and it seems a little odd. And sometimes even though I've run for office myself, I share the kind of built-in conflict between running for judge. So you're running for an office and you're telling people how great you are and what you're going to do, and it becomes a very politicized thing, because all campaigns are. And yet, when you reach the bench, you have to be anything but political.
Right.
How do you handle that?
I've thought about this a lot, because it seems inappropriate to run to be a judge. But then again, the people need to make a decision who becomes their judge. So how do you do it? There have been suggestions of, you have panels and you let politicians pick from a panel. Well, I was slated, but I still don't think that's the best method. Not to say, okay, now she's slated, she becomes a judge. And it's Illinois politics. So
and we all know that slating is in fact very important. When
it's
running for
very
judge.
important,
Yeah.
but I don't think that should automatically elevate anyone. Not to a position where they become judge. I still think they need to run. But then by the same token, people don't vote for judges. The drop-off is amazing. For example, if you had 100% vote for governor, you may have 20% voting for the judges. So the electorate doesn't vote for us. But
Which is why we do these shows.
Right,
because,
exactly,
right?
exactly.
Because people
But
need to know.
I agree, but they also don't know where to go. They don't know. I've had people say, I don't even know how to figure out who the judges are. And there's no giant list without going to the Board of Elections and navigating the Board of Elections website and figuring out who the candidates are, and then going to every candidate's website individually, or calling the candidate and saying, where are you going to be so I can see you speak. So
Well, there are the Bar Association ratings, though.
there
You
are
can
the
look
Bar
there.
Association ratings, but those aren't necessarily endorsements. They're merely saying that your background is qualified.
Right.
Then you have the Tribune or other newspapers that do endorsements, and then you have endorsements from, like, I'm endorsed by the CFL, so you have endorsements by the CFL. So there are different
Chicago
places
Federation
to look.
of Labor,
Yes,
right,
Chicago
yes.
Federation of Labor. There are different areas to look, but the average citizen doesn't necessarily know, which is why you have such a drop when you get to the bottom of the ballot, which, as we said in the beginning, you're going to get to a judge quicker than you're going to get to the president or the governor or anyone else, but it's the one that no one votes for. It's the office no one votes for.
Well, I have spent time working off and on with the elections department for suburban Cook County, and so I've seen that kind of fall off in the voting patterns, and it's a great frustration to anyone who has ever worked in elections that does happen because of the importance of these down ballot positions, and judges are always last, and it's a long list, and it's a long ballot.
Right.
And so after you've voted for a governor or a president or whichever election it is, even the municipal election, I voted for my mayor, and maybe I got all the way down to school board and library board, but
Right.
judges?
Right.
Whoa. So how do you approach that? How do you convince, when you're out speaking, how do you convince people that voting for these judges is important, or voting for any judges?
Well, one way is I start with, you can always start at the back of the ballot. Where
there you go.
You know you're going to vote for the governor, just start at the back. So if you get bored somewhere in the middle, you make it all the way through because you're going to vote for governor. But it goes back to the importance of judges. The fact that judges rule on constitutional issues. Judges ruled if health care was allowed. Judges have ruled on gun control. Judges ruled on if there'll be medical marijuana. Judges ruled on the equality in marriage. These are all jobs of judges, not just legislators. Legislators may make the laws, but judges uphold them.
Or determine if they're constitutional.
Right, they uphold, exactly.
Well,
they
upholding,
say,
right? Yeah.
exactly, they say not constitutional, it can't happen anymore. So if people really understood the role of judges, which I think they don't, I think so many people think, I'm not going to commit a crime, so I'm not going to be in front of a judge. And they don't look at the other areas where they may be a landlord, they may own property. Well, they may have to evict someone, which means they're going to be in front of a judge.
Or and I think what people don't realize is that anybody can get sued at any time for anything.
Yes.
And I've had conversations with friends of mine who are attorneys who constantly remind me of that, say, oh, well, the law wouldn't hold that up. And he said, it doesn't matter. If someone wants to sue you, they can do it. Even if there's no real case there, they can still file it. You still have to defend it. And so that frequently means, unless you can reach some sort of settlement, you're going before a judge. Right? So anyone can find themselves in a position of being in front of the bench, right?
Right.
So coming back to the campaign, how many positions are available and how many candidates are running?
There are 11 positions that are available countywide. I don't know how many are available sub-circuit. And I know that confuses people all the time. There are 11 positions that are open for that
Countywide.
Everyone will vote on. Everyone, no matter where you live, if you live in Cook County, you will have an opportunity to vote on one of those 11, or all 11, excuse me.
Yes.
And then I like to think of all 11 of us, we're going for the whole pie. And then the sub-circuit, it's kind of like slices of pie. So there's several sub-circuit candidates. There are also 3 positions available for the appellate court. Now, I'm running for the circuit court, which would basically be where everyone starts. Everyone, regardless of the type of case, as long as it is not federal law, it would be a case that the circuit court would hear. If you disagree with my ruling, you would then go to the appellate court. And there are 3 spots available on the appellate court.
Now, the appellate court is still, that's at the county level, or now you're at the state level for the appellate court?
Well, all of this is all of these are state positions. We just run countywide. Or
so, are there appellate court judges just for Cook County?
There are appellate court judges for the first district.
Okay.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Which is Cook County.
Okay. Right.
Yes.
First district is Cook County.
Or First Circuit. Sorry.
Okay. It gets confusing. I know. I spent enough time in politics myself to know. So we only have about 30 seconds left. So what would you like to leave our potential voters who are watching this? What kind of message would you like to leave them with?
Well, thanks for watching. If they'd like to know more about me, my website is Rivers4Judge, number 4judge.org.
We displayed that at some point.
Oh, hopefully.
Yeah.
Good. I can be reached on Facebook, Twitter, Rivers4Judge. You can text that to 72727. My punch number is 147. I'm running for the Connors vacancy. My goal as a judge is to be fair, to hear all the evidence, to let everyone who appears before me know that they are respected as a human first, and know that I appreciate the fact that they're there, and I will listen to them and give them a fair trial.
I can't think of a better way to sum it up. Thank you, Ms. Rivers.
You're
Thank you so much for
welcome.
being here.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us once again on Public Perspective. I'm your host, Kevin McDermott. You can find us every Saturday night at 8 on Comcast Channel 19 and see us on the web at publicperspective.tv. So until next time, thank you and good night.